This is Vote Her In, a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. On today's episode, we interview Robin Marty, author of Handbook for a Post-Roe America and The End of Roe v. Wade. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly, and you're listening to Vote Her In, which is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. And I'm still on a little bit of a high from last week's DNC, so I hope that you're all excited, ready for this election, too. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rebecca, who will introduce our guest today. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly. Glad to be here. You know, I too am on a high, although I have to say, looking a little bit of the news today about the, first day of the RNC gave me some pause. So I'm particularly glad that our guest today is Robin Marty, who is a wonderful writer and is the expert, as far as I'm concerned, on matters related to abortion rights and reproductive rights. She's written a couple of books on the topic. She's presently the Director of Communications for West Alabama Women's Center, which is just one of 3 abortion clinics in Alabama. And I have always just found Robin to be incredibly thoughtful. And we thought on this first day of the RNC that it would be important to share with each other and learn a bit about what's going to be happening on this issue, because, of course, I think for the next 3 days and probably all the way through November 3rd, we're going to hear a lot of anti-choice and anti-women's rhetoric. So thank you, Robin, for joining us. And I'll just kick it off with the first question to you about your sense of the current movement against women's reproductive rights and where you think, as a consequence of that, we could and should focus our actions between now and November 3rd.
Right. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me on, Rebecca and Kelly. So I think in order to frame where we are right now, we have to understand that when it comes to 2016, abortion is the reason that Donald Trump is in the White House. Abortion was the one thing that all people on the right could get together on and decide this is the reason that we are going to go ahead and vote for somebody that honestly, they did not see, the religious right did not see him as a beacon of anything that they could support. He was a philanderer. He used to be a Democrat. He was nothing to them, but they knew that if they were going to have any chance of taking the White House, and especially any chance of taking the Supreme Court, which at that point still had one vacancy because Mitch McConnell had held the seat open, that they would have to get together in order to get him elected. And so if people ask me, who do I think is the most powerful group on the right, and I would call it the Susan B. Anthony list. And the Susan B. Anthony list originally started as this idea of electing pro-life women into office, but eventually they turned into doing nothing but being another arm of the Republican Party. And the Susan B. Anthony list is literally, in my opinion, responsible for getting Trump elected, because they did this amazing micro-targeting program, knocking doors in Wisconsin, in Ohio, in Florida, and in Iowa, and bringing out voters who don't normally turn out to vote or who might have been soft, and saying this is your one chance to make sure that abortion could eventually become illegal. And that's how he ended up winning the Electoral College. So I think if we look at 2020 as compared to 2016, we can see a lot of this happening again. Susan B. Anthony list has yet again been out in these states, door knocking for months already. And one of the things that really galvanized them in 2016 was the fact that we had just over the summer had Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt decided in the Supreme Court. And that was the case where Texas tried to close most of its abortion clinics. And the Supreme Court decided that it would create an undue burden on the right to an abortion. Now we're looking at 2020, and we had a similar, almost exact same case, June v. Russo, that just went to the Supreme Court. And surprisingly to most people, was decided by the Supreme Court that there still is a right to an abortion and that closing most of the clinics is an undue burden to that. So my concern is that in 2020, we are going to see the same repeat that we saw before. There was one vote that kept it from becoming a chance to overturn Roe. And so I believe that the GOP is going to say, as they're knocking on their doors, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg leaves the court, if Justice Breyer leaves the court, we have one, possibly two new seats that we could get staunch anti-abortion activists in, and that's going to bring people out to vote again.
One of the biggest challenges in reproductive rights and in fighting to maintain safe legal abortion is the issue of messaging. And the messaging that works the best changes over time. So what do you think at this particular moment in time is the best messaging that we should be using? If you were advising Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their surrogates on how to talk about this issue right now, what would be your advice for them?
Right. So I think that what we really need to do is make sure that abortion is understood and birth control is understood as being part of the full spectrum of being able to decide when and if a person wants to have a family and what they want that family to look like. And so overall, we need them to be able to say that we need government support and not coercion, and that we need to ensure that every person who's capable of getting pregnant can have access to the type of birth control they want, as well as the type of birth services that they want, the type of fertility services they want, the ability to adopt and do it regardless of their religion or their sexuality or if they're married or not or what their race or income level is. And along with that, the ability to terminate a pregnancy if that's what they choose to do too. So I want to see this as part of a full message about controlling your own lives and your own families and what that looks like. And to say that they want to champion a government that believes that all of these services should be accessible, affordable, and available, and that it should range from ending abortion restrictions to ending childcare caps and caps on welfare and other social services. Every person should be able to decide if they want no children and as many children as they want, and there should be no government coercion to get in the way of that.
So when you think about that, Robin, I mean, one question I have is, it sounds right to me. It also sounds like a bit of a reach, but of course there are these Senate races where the issue is also paramount, and where people are aware of these Supreme Court decisions. And I'm wondering if you could share with us or assess various Senate races that you view as key, and, for instance, how likely they may be to enunciate the kind of message you're proposing that the presidential ticket take on.
Well, I can tell you that when it comes to all of the Senate races, what the senators, the Democratic candidates are going to face is this message that is basically crafted. And I think you're going to hear it talked about a lot in the RNC over this week. This message is carefully crafted by anti-abortion activists that say that Democrats believe in infanticide, and that because they will not pass a bill that says that they support making sure that life-supporting services are given to an infant that survives an abortion, that means that they want to kill babies. And we saw this in 2016 with the idea of so-called partial birth abortion, which is not a thing that actually exists. But the right has decided the only way that they can keep abortion as a real political issue for themselves is to paint all abortion only under this frame of it happening just moments before birth on fully healthy, viable babies that are just literally a week from being able to come out of the birth canal, and that they're being left somewhere to die, which is not in any way, shape, or form what abortion looks like. Abortion is almost always in the first trimester and usually in the first 10 weeks. Abortion usually happens because people have decided that they do not want to be pregnant and they try to get an abortion as soon as they can, except that the government will put up roadblocks. So this idea of what the right says with, you're going to hear born alive, you're going to hear infanticide, all of these words. And one of the places where we're going to see a lot of that, and we're already seeing that, is here in Alabama where I'm working, where Doug Jones is the only Democrat right now that is considered to be vulnerable for his reelection seat. He is being challenged by a Republican who is, in essence, handpicked by Trump. The Republican beat Jeff Sessions for the nomination, and they're already coming at him with Doug Jones supports infanticide. And one of the things that I really admire, Doug Jones, to be honest, is no huge friend to abortion rights supporters. He does not believe that it should be banned by any means, but he's definitely not going to be a champion that's cheering about abortion and reproductive rights as his whole way of getting into office. But he essentially, when being confronted with this sort of argument, says, this is a ridiculous argument, I'm not going to talk about it. And it's fair, because what they are saying is ridiculous. The frame that they are using does not exist in the real world. So I think it's really great for any Democrat who in any office who is approached by this. Do you believe in infanticide? Do you believe that a baby that is born alive in an abortion should be saved? To say, this is a ridiculous scenario. I'm going to talk about real issues.
And just, are there other arguments that you think they may hear short of that one that for them to be ready to counter?
I mean, you're going to see a lot of this born alive, and we already know this because every presidential race so far, the Susan B. Anthony list, either directly or through a surrogate, has brought about a series of advertisements that they will do in battleground states where they will have what is known as an abortion survivor discuss how she managed to survive an abortion, and that if Democrats had their way, they would have made sure that she died. And her name is Melissa Ohden. They already have her ads running now. They just announced they're going to be running it in Iowa and Florida. And so, yeah, that's going to be their main thing. It's why they're going to have Abby Johnson speaking at the Republican National Convention, because she has become the spokesperson for Planned Parenthood is evil and wants to sell babies' body parts. And by the way, everybody's going to let a baby that should have been viable die after an abortion.
So there's a lot of focus this year, with very good reason, on the top of the ticket on the presidential election, on the Senate elections. But there are a lot of competitive House races. Are there House seats that you are looking at in particular where either there's a re-election by an incumbent that we need to be really focused on, or where a pro-choice challenger has a good chance of flipping a seat?
Well, when it comes to pro-choice challengers, I mean, obviously, one victory that we basically already have in hand is right there in Illinois with Mary Newman. I'm so excited about Mary winning because the fact that she won her primary against Dan Lipinski this last go-around, to me, is a beacon of hope that maybe the election plan of the right is not going to work. When Marie Newman ran against Dan Lipinski, who is one of, I think, 3 remaining anti-abortion Democrats in Congress, the Susan B. Anthony list actually came out and campaigned for him. He was, in essence, I think, one of the only Democratic candidates that they've ever campaigned for, and partially because he would come and speak at their events about how much he needed them because he was their voice in Congress. And the Susan B. Anthony list came out in 2018 and specifically door-knocked and even ran a campaign of telling Republicans that they needed to go switch over and vote in the primary since there was nobody for them to vote for on their party in order to try and get Lipinski in. They did the exact same thing during the primary going around again, and this time they lost. And to me, that gives me some hope that their message is not going to work this go around. And that really makes me feel good about our prospects. And then when it comes to other races where we see pro-choice people who are going against Republicans, I'm really excited about the race in Nebraska, which is where I'm from originally. And Kara Eastman is running again. She lost by, I believe, 2 percentage points in 2018. And she is doing another challenge. But one of the things that's changed so much in Omaha over the last decade for sure, but especially over the last couple of years, is there's been so much progressive change there. So there's been wonderful work being done by the Democratic Party out there, but also all of this movement work on banning the death penalty. They were at the forefront of gay marriage. They have a really powerful Black Lives Matters movement. There's all of this great intersectional progressive work that is happening there that makes me think that Kara Eastman should be able to pull it off this time.
And we're also hoping for Betsy Londrigan in Illinois. You know, she also is challenging again, and I think running a strong race. So, you know, one of the pieces of this, of course, is there's the Congress, there's the Office of the President, the executive branch, and then, as you mentioned earlier when we talked about the Supreme Court, the courts. And so, of course, we know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have expressly stated their commitment to pro-choice policies. And I'm wondering what you think, hoping, pushing, organizing for them to be elected. What sorts of legislation and policies would you like them to initially promulgate? And in that context, I do want to mention this recent legislation to repeal the Hyde Amendment that Jan Schakowsky and Ayanna Pressley and several others have sponsored.
Right. So repealing the Hyde Amendment, honestly, is essential and will be a huge game changer, especially if we can eventually manage to get Medicaid and Medicare for all. But the Hyde Amendment itself, which forbids any form of public insurance, so either Medicaid, if you are a public employee, there's all sorts of examples of ways that if you have insurance that is in any way, shape, or form is paid so-called by the government taxpayer, that it cannot cover abortion. And an abortion, a first trimester abortion, can run anywhere from $500 to $1,000, depending on, and that's just the procedure, that if your clinic is nowhere near you, then you have to take time off of work, you have to find childcare, you might have to stay overnight if you live in a state like Alabama where you have a 48-hour waiting period. So there's all of these other essential costs that come onto it. And so getting rid of the Hyde Amendment would mean that more people would be able to access abortion with their insurance, which would be wonderful. But that on its own is not enough, because in the states that we do have Medicaid that pays for abortion, we know that the reimbursement rate is so poor that in a lot of cases we are seeing clinics that are closing because if they do a lot of Medicaid abortion, they're actually losing money all of the time and can't afford to keep themselves open. So while repealing the Hyde Amendment is a great start, we also need to make sure that there are changes in reimbursement rate, which doesn't sound, it's not nearly as sexy of a thing to be talking about, but it's practical support that we need to have happen. But one of the things that I'm excited about, if we can manage to get a Democratic presidency, is we saw how quickly just having a Republican in the White House made it come to abortion restrictions, not through any sort of laws, but just through executive action and nominations. So one of the biggest things that has happened with the Trump administration, and is actually one of the chapters in my book, End of Roe v. Wade, is about all the ways that the administration itself has blocked off abortion access, from allowing conscientious rights so that doctors don't have to provide abortion, and so that even employers don't have to cover it in their birth control. They're not enforcing the FACE Act, which means that anti-abortion protesters outside of clinics are not getting in trouble for frightening people away from being able to access care. And they have a number of people, they have politicized the Federal Food and Drug Association and Health and Human Services to a point where it is much, much, much harder for people to access abortion than it should be, because the FDA is blocking it. And one of the biggest examples of that right now is a lawsuit that just went through where essentially a federal judge said that there's no reason that we have to have this protocol that makes it almost impossible for a person to be able to access medication abortion from their home without going into a clinic or seeing a doctor. Medication abortion is extremely safe, but 20 years ago, it was put under a protocol that says that for the most part, it cannot be mailed to a person, and that a person has to have an ultrasound prior to getting it. And in the 20 years that have passed, they have discovered that is completely medically unnecessary. And especially now with COVID happening, it's actually dangerous to require this, because people need to leave their homes in order to be able to get this pill that could just be sent to them. We have programs right now like Gynuity, which has telemedicine abortion that's happening in 15 states where people can get access to pills and have them mailed to them. but we cannot have that expanded, and this might actually disappear because the FDA is fighting it. So being able to have an administration that believes in science, that believes in reproductive rights, that believes in all of these things, people having access, being able to care for their own bodies, and honestly being able to get abortion itself out of abortion clinics, we will never truly have the right to an abortion until the right to an abortion belongs to each person who wants to have one and not located within a clinic being able to provide it.
You know, there's a lot more we could talk about, including about, some of the cases coming up in the Supreme Court. But Robin, I want to respect your time and the time of our listeners and make sure that we'll provide on the website links to all of this. And we really hope all of you will consider this carefully, listen carefully, and make sure that this fundamental right of ours is not compromised as we go forward. So, Kelly, any parting thoughts on this before we say goodbye in RNC week?
Just, Robin, thank you so much for joining us. And I think these issues are so important, and it's so great that so many women and so many pro-choice candidates are running for office now. But that doesn't mean we can let up and stop paying attention and pushing.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was wonderful.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our segment editor is Rachel Wallstad. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.